Hi, this is Kevin Trainer. Welcome to my lecture on Chapter 3 from the Kathy Schwalbe book, An Introduction to Project Management, 7th edition. Chapter 3 is about project life cycles and initiating projects. Let's get started. So, the learning objectives for the chapter are interesting. I leave you to read those on your own. Um, the there there are two cases that are used to give I think really useful examples in the chapter, and one is the just-in-time training project, which uses a predictive or waterfall approach to project management. And the other is the Global Construction Human Capital project, which is using a more agile hybrid approach. Okay, so um, I think the cases are worth a read because it makes it easy to understand the rest of the chapter. So, development approaches and project life cycles. So, historically, say go back 10 years, 15 years, uh, the approach of the formal project management people, uh, which is in terms of formal project management people, um, I think that PMI, Project Management International, um, they really represent the dominant voice of organized, formal, professional project management in the United States. Okay. And say 15 years ago, everything that they talked about, except just a little bit of talk about Agile, everything that they talked about was uh, the predictive kind of waterfall approach. There's a little bit of lip service to Agile, but not a whole lot. Now, 15 years goes by, and that's changed dramatically. Okay, so the PMI folks, in terms of what they're promoting and what they're documenting, and has gives a lot more time and attention to Agile. Okay, and so this chapter is, I think, a good representation of the current kind of PMI point of view. And Kathy Schwalbe is a person who I think does a really good job of taking the PMI point of view and making it learnable. Okay. Um, so it talks about um, approaches for projects that are going to take the more traditional predictive or waterfall approach, and it talks about um, projects that are going to take a more agile approach. Okay, so I think they're both covered here, and I think they're both taken appropriately seriously by the people who I talked about. Okay, um, so when you're going to talk about a project, um, you have to have some kind of concept about how you're going to organize the work in the project. And there's a lot of talk about how to organize work in software development projects. So if you look at the language that we go through here, the talk that we go through here, it makes sense for the projects that we're talking about. Now, these aren't software development projects. These are kind of training development projects. But they're, training is an information product. It's not a bridge. It's not a road. It's not a home. It's not an office building. Okay. So a lot of the talk here in the chapter about project life cycles and approach to developing things is probably more geared towards information products than it is towards physical products. Okay. And that's okay because we're taking this course at an high school, and most of us are going to be in some kind of information professionals, and a lot of the projects that we're going to manage have are related to information products, not always information systems. So, to get back to the slides here, development approaches and project life cycles. Um, so the PMI Bible on project management I mentioned in a lecture on an earlier chapter is called the PMBOK, Project Management Body of Knowledge. And the most recent one, which is a couple years old, is the seventh edition. And it highlighted a couple things that older versions didn't. And one of the things that it included was the inclusion of a project performance domain called Development Approaches and Project Life Cycles. Before initiating project, it's important to consider which approach to use. And uh, the idea here is that depending upon what your project is going to deliver, you need to have a kind of framework in mind about how you're going to organize the project that's suitable for that kind of product or service. So a development approach is a method used to create and evolve the product, service, or result during the project lifecycle, such as predictive, iterative, incremental, adaptive, or hybrid. Okay? And one term that they talk about is cadence, which is a rhythm of activities conducted throughout the project. So here on slide 5, we have, I think, a pretty good um, attempt to compare how things would be different depending upon the approach that we're taking, predictive versus agile, and in the middle, sort of iterative and incremental. Okay, and so I'm not going to read everything here, but in predictive, uh, requirements are defined up front before development begins. In agile, requirements are elaborated frequently during delivery. And one of the things that we're going to see about Agile is that in an Agile project, we will identify user stories up front, but user stories, some of the really hardcore Agile people say a user story is just a reminder to have a conversation with the stakeholders later when you're really going to go elicit the requirements. So user stories give you a broad feel for what the requirements might be, and to help you kind of size the effort and kind of understand um, where you're going with the project. But even though we're collecting them up front and we're documenting them in a kind of a lightweight way, they're not as committed to or finalized as the requirements all the way over on the predictive side. So I'm not going to read my way all the way through this, but there are clearly differences between the predictive and the agile, and this iterative and incremental are kind of in between. So this for iterative incremental, we say the requirements can be elaborated at periodic intervals during the delivery. Okay, so um, I think this is I think this is a good attempt to give you a broad view of different approaches that you can take to the work in a project, especially these information-oriented projects, um, and not get too bogged down with some of the almost religious fervor that you get, especially from the agile folks, that there's only one way to do things. I think you can see from the diagram here that there's kind of a range of places where you can kind of park yourself on these issues, including um, requirements, delivery, change, stakeholders, risk. These are the things that they talk about within this table, and that it's probably true that you and the project team will do well to just dial yourself into where you want to be. Okay. So what's the difference between iterative and incremental uh, development approaches? And I really like this visual here. So in iterative, the customer provides feedback after every iteration, often done in a set amount of time. So as you can see, I guess we're working on the Mona Lisa. Okay, and we have sketch one, sketch two, then we have a sort of a colored in sketch and a more colored in sketch, so we're kind of rendering the whole thing, uh, but we're looking at it and we're correcting it as we go. Whereas incremental, um, each increment it builds on top of the previous one. Okay, and when we're building it, we're pretty much building the whole thing. You can notice in the incremental approach, um, in the first deliverable, we have the top of the Mona Lisa painting, and it's pretty much in its final state. And then, we add, and then we add, and then we add. Um, it's probably true that if you read through the Agile stuff, the stuff that they say when they talk about the Scrum version of Agile, it's probably more incremental than iterative. Uh, we pick a couple of user stories that we want to work on, and we go build them, and we build them. You know, we don't build a sketch of them. We actually build them. Okay, so could somebody take an iterative kind of approach to Agile? Yeah, they could. But I'd say that the Scrum version of Agile, which is the most popular one, is more incremental than iterative. Okay, let's talk about project life cycles. So, a project life cycle is a series of phases that a project passes through from its start to completion. A project phase is a collection of logically related project activities that culminates in the completion of one or more of the deliverables. Okay. So, one of the things I really like about this textbook, and again, this illustration is coming from the PMBOK, which comes from PMI, is that we're really saying that regardless of whether you're doing the predictive approach or maybe you're doing some kind of incremental developmental approach, or whether you're doing, you know, agile a la Scrum, you do have a project life cycle. Okay, a lot of people, a lot of the agile folks would say something. Well, we don't have a big project life cycle. Well, this part that we're showing down the bottom is the life cycle for the Scrum version of Agile. Okay, so in the classic waterfall um, um, approach, we might have phases like feasibility, design, build, test, deploy, and close. And again, these phases make more sense for a project in which we're developing some kind of an information product than if we're building a bridge. Okay, if we're going to build a bridge, we probably would have, um, and almost any kind of a physical product, we probably would have a different set of project lifecycle phases. Um, in this incremental approach here, um, this incremental is what we used to call a prototyping approach. So it really looks like what we're doing is we're building three prototypes. Okay. And probably the first one is a bit of a sketch, and the second one is more filled in. And then the third one is fully filled in, and then we're done. Okay. Um, and this third one, which again, this is a good uh, picture for Agile Scrum. We begin by defining the project and the product vision. Okay, so we did some lightweight planning up front. And then we have these iterations, which in Scrum are typically called sprints. Okay, and they're typically short, and we typically are building all of some subset. Okay, and that's quoted the equivalent of incremental. All right. Um, so I think it's important to realize that whatever approach you're going to take, that products and services, as they live in the organization, have a life cycle. So, um, let's say we have a particular product. Say it's a software product, right? And in project one, we initially create it, and in project two, we add more features. In project three, we add more features yet. Project four, we do revisions. In five, we do revisions. In six, we do revisions. And then in project seven, uh, we're going to retire the product. It's probably going to be, we could call this. It, so we're probably going to maybe the demand for the product has gone away, right? Or if there's still a demand in that space, well, maybe we have a new product that's coming on. It's going to have its project one. And you could think of in terms of the product life cycle, not the project life cycle, that we introduce the project, we grow the project. Project is mature and then it declines and we retire it. Okay, so when you're looking at the work that we do in projects, okay, and then we try to translate that into uh, product management in some organization. We can see that in a series of projects, you can plot them in terms of where they would live on this kind of uh, uh, design here for phases of product life cycle. Okay, so One of the things that I've always liked about the PMI approach to formal project management is that they've had these five project management process groups. Um, so they have initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. Okay. And uh, they say a process is a series of actions that it directed toward a particular result. So the PMI point of view, which I think that PMI again, PMI is I think the most credible voice for thoughtful professional project management in the U.S. And what they're really saying here is that when you're working on a project, you're always working on one or more processes to make the project go. And it's helpful to kind of categorize these because it helps you understand them better so that you can manage them better and be more effective. And that's why these five groups, again, initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. That's why thinking of the processes that you're doing as falling into one of the groups is helpful. So, initiating processes include actions to begin projects and project phases. Planning includes devising and maintaining a workable scheme to ensure that the project meets its scope, time, and cost goals as well as other organizational needs. The executing processes included coordinating the people and other resources to carry out the project plans and to produce the deliverables of the project phase. A deliverable is a product or service produced or provided as part of the project. Now, um, so we wouldn't do a project if we weren't expecting it to get some kind of output. We weren't expecting to deliver something. So in project management speak, these things that we're expecting are called deliverables. Okay, and I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase "plan the work and work the plan." Okay, so the initiating and planning are kind of planning the work, and the executing is working the plan. Okay, it's the doing. And monitoring and controlling is kind of working the plan as well. So, monitoring and controlling processes measure progress towards achieving project goals. We monitor deviation from plans, and we take corrective actions to match progress with plans and customer expectations. And then closing processes include formalized acceptance of the project or phase and bringing it to an orderly end. And this kind of gets back to the point that we made in earlier chapters. The projects are temporary. Okay, things that continue on forever are continuing operations of the organization. So it's the nature of a project that it's going to end, and it's the nature of a well-run project that it ends well, and ending it well is this closing process. So here's a graphic that's been around the PMI world for a while, and we're talking about the level of effort over time. And what you're seeing is that as you go through the life of the project, you know, there's a there's a hump of activity for initiating, and then there's a hump for planning, and then there's a hump for executing, and then there's this kind of monitoring and controlling is kind of spread out more or less evenly throughout the project, but because we're doing more work doing this executing, there's more labor in it. Um, and then we're going to come to the end and we're going to do closing. Okay, so this is the way to kind of visualize uh, in terms of project management work, all right, where all the time's going. Now, here's an interesting claim. Okay, so the claim on slide 13 is that high performing project managers, who they call uh, alpha PMs, like, the alpha wolf, the alpha dog, or whatever, uh, they spend their time differently. They direct the team such that the team spends different proportions of time in these various process groups. Okay, so if we look at the average, okay, what they're saying is that on average, in terms of the project management uh, labor expenditure, the average PM spends 1% of their time in the initiating, 11% in planning, 82% in executing, that's actually doing the job, 4% in monitoring and controlling, 2% in closing, and that adds up to 100%. And these are just kind of average performers. And the claim here is that, the alpha dogs, the people who get the job done, and everybody wants them to manage their project, they'll spend more time up front. So they'll spend twice as much time initiating, almost twice as much time planning, okay, considerably less time executing. And the idea here is that if you're doing the right things for the right people, you're not wasting your time so much. So that they're saying there's a saving in this kind of executing these executing processes by having been more thoughtful and complete up front. About the same amount on monitoring and controlling, about the same amount on closing. And my explanation for this has always been that there's a lot of pressure on project managers to get going, to start doing, to get to executing. Okay. And senior management will say stuff like, yeah, yeah, you're writing a project charter, you're coming up with a project plan. When are you going to start building this thing? I need you to build this thing. It's late. Pressure, pressure, pressure. And my explanation for this, and explanations I've heard from other people, is that more senior experienced PMs are better at resisting that early on, um, and spending the time to get things kind of defined and organized and planned the right way. So with that, when they finally engaged, uh, they and their project teams are that much more effective. Okay? Now, you're either going to believe this claim or you're not. Okay? But that's the claim that's made. And I believe that there is some substantial truth in it. Okay? Um, so the level of activity and the length of each process group varies for every project. Normally, executing tasks require the most resources. Okay. Typically, there's more doing than planning. Monitoring and controlling are done throughout the project's lifespan. Initiating and closing tasks are usually the shortest. However, every project is unique, so that there are going to be exceptions. Um, Another thought the PMI's had for a long time is that they say you can kind of take these process groups and say that you can apply them to each phase. Because, like, if in fact you're really going to take a phased approach, like we just saw, well, then, uh, you're going to initiate and close every phase. Okay, so that you can kind of see that every phase is kind of a microcosm of the overall project. So, one of the things that they did in the sixth edition of this PM which is one back. So this is 2017. This is 6 years old. Okay, is that they decided that they were going to map um, activities and things that we do in project management, that they were going to create a table and they were going to say where things were located, both in the process groups and in the 10 knowledge areas. And again, I have to remind you, what are the process groups and what are the knowledge areas? These are faceted, we and information science would say that these are classification facets. So you take everything that we do in PM and you say you can classify them according to process groups. Okay, and then you can take everything that we do in PM and you could say you could classify them according to the knowledge areas that they relate to. So then you could create a table. Okay, so you could take pretty much everything that's part of PM and say, well, where does it fit in knowledge areas and where does it fit in the process groups? Now, there are people who teach formal project management and who try to prepare folks for taking PMI's certification exams who like to talk through this grid. Okay, it doesn't appeal to me personally, but it might appeal to you. And where could you find the complete grid? Well, you could find the complete grid um, in the sixth edition of the PM Bach. And how could you get access to that? Well, this is a good time to say that if you join the PMI organization, which isn't a lot of money, especially for students, well, then you get to log into their website, and all those kinds of documents are available there. Um, here's a slide, slide number 17, where we're going to claim that uh, following formal project management practices pays off for organizations. I mean, that's the claim here. Okay, so there's a 5-year study by Ibbs and uh, I've always said Reginato. It might be Reginato, but probably Reginato. Organizations with more mature project management practices have better project performance, which result in projects completed on time and within their budget much more often. Project management maturity is strongly correlated with a more predictable project schedule and cost performance. Organizations that follow good project management methodologies uh, have lower direct costs of project management, 6%, than those that do not. Okay, and I'll come back to that in just a second. Several experts have warned against cutting back on project and portfolio management during tough economic times. So the claim here is here's what kind of happens in the field. Okay. Um, Even though senior management in your organization believes in formal project management, senior management is often impatient, okay, because they have goals they have to get the organization to. And even though, on one hand, they're going to say that they're committed to good formal project management practices, that doesn't keep them from yelling "hurry" as soon as you start to work on the project. And sometimes they're shouting it, "Hurry, hurry, 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 hurry." So there's a lot of pressure to move quickly. Okay, and and then there's a concern that people have that the that the more thoughtful that you are about managing the project and more time that you take, the more it's going the more it's going to cost to manage the project, the more overhead that you're going to get from it. And the claim here is that, and it can at least there's some research to support it, is that the organizations that don't get hurried, okay, the organization who take their time and who follow a thoughtful and repeatable process for managing projects, because of the fact that they do things the right way, they don't get into trouble, and they spend half of the effort managing the project than they would if they hurried and they didn't pay attention. Again, this is a claim. You're going to believe it or you're not. Okay. So this is kind of counterintuitive, right? So when you really think of it, the common person would think, well, the more you work on project management, the more you're paying for it. And the claim here is no. In fact, if you get really serious about project management and you invest in it, you might spend about half the time and cost doing it than if you just hurry and you don't pay attention. Um, One big issue in the chapter that I think is a well made point is that in any organization, the commitment from the top management people in the organization to your project is a big deal. And without that, many projects are going to fail. And often, uh, people will talk about projects having a champion, which is who would be a senior manager, um, and not a lot of times we'll talk about a project sponsor. So a project sponsor is a person who would have the budget authority to spend for the project. But a lot of times, the champion is even higher up the chain. They're the president, they're the chairman, they're the senior vice president, they're um, uh, uh, the dean for research. They're a very high level person who is going to push for this project. Um, um, so projects are part of a larger organization environment, and many factors that might affect a project are out of the project manager's control. And this is completely true. Okay, so um, uh, how does the project manager get favorable treatment for her project if a lot of the important things are out of her control? Well, she finds senior managers who will go to bat for the project, and perhaps one who will be so enthusiastic that somebody might characterize that person as a champion for the project. Now, how does it help the project, right? Having senior management committed. Well, the senior management provides the resources. Okay. Um, they can approve unique project needs in a timely manner. So that's two issues rolled into one. One, they can get you approval for things that are not ordinarily approved. That's unique project needs in a timely manner. Very often, the bureaucracy of organizations just takes too long to get you approvals and to give you the resources that you need. And having friends in high places can help to get the job done. Encourage cooperation from people in other parts of the organization and deal with political issues. If these high level managers are over more than just one part of the organization, they can make it known to people that they want this project to succeed and that people are expected to cooperate with the project. They can mentor and coach the project manager on leadership issues. That's a good thing. They can develop and enforce organizational standards, which means, I guess, you could say that they could lead the organization to be a place where you could have r- rational expectations. Okay, it wouldn't be a chaotic kind of a place to run your project. And they could sort of they could support a project management office. Now, we're going to talk about the PMO next. And PMOs, it can be hurtful, but quite frankly, I think that did I say hurtful? I meant helpful. I think they can be helpful or hurtful. So let's just say support a helpful PMO. Oh, now we're at the PMO. So what's the PMO? Well, PMO stands for Project Management Office. It's an organizational entity created to assist project managers in achieving project goals. So when you have this kind of characterization of what a PMO is, well, it sounds helpful, and it can be. So the average age of a PMO is 6 years. The average annual budget is $1.5 million, and it has a staff of 8. The average capability maturity rating for a PMO is 2.5 on a scale of 1 to 5. So in the book, they talk about these capability maturity models. So they're saying that uh, organizations that have PMOs, well, the people in it are pretty capable. Okay, they're not superstars. They're not going to rate a 5, but in a world where a lot of new project managers themselves would rate a 1, well, to have help from people who would rate a 2.5 would be good. Uh, PMOs in high performing organizations have a capability maturity rating of 2.9, and we're 10 years old on average with a budget of $3 million. So in high performing organizations, they were even more impressive. Okay. Uh, on slide number, not numbered here, uh, uh, we see the percentage of organization with PMOs. And so large organizations are more likely to have a PMO. So large organizations, 93%, mid-size 81, small 61. Okay. Possible goals of a PMO: collect, organize, and integrate project data for the entire organization. So uh, give management a combined report on how all the projects are doing collectively. Research, develop, and share best practices in project management. Well, that certainly could help individual PMs. Develop and maintain templates, tools, standards and methodologies. Well, those could be helpful to an individual PM. Develop and coordinate training in various project management topics. Again, that could be helpful to an individual PM. Develop and provide a formal career path for project managers. Uh, that could be helpful. Provide project management consulting services. This can be, I think, be really helpful to PMs who are new, who want somebody to hold their hand a bit. Okay, a lot of times you're not exactly sure what you're going to do. Having somebody from the PMO to say, yeah, you're doing that the right way, or maybe you want to change this a bit, that could have a real value. Provide a structure to house project managers while they're acting in those roles or between projects. Okay, so this paints, I think, a really good picture of what a PMO can do. Okay, I just want to point out that on the downside, PMOs, most of us watch these police procedural shows, right? And we know that there's this kind of group called internal affairs, the rat squad, the guys who are going around trying to accuse everybody of like improper police behavior. Okay. Well, a PMO can be the rat squad. Okay. And I've seen PMOs that are rat squads. Okay. So to the extent that a PMO can be the rat squad, that it's just going around trying to find what's wrong with what everybody's doing in managing projects and ratting them out to senior management. Well, all this kind of good stuff that we painted here is not true. Okay. So, like anything in life, these things can be done for good or for evil. And again, we've painted a rosy picture of what a PMO can do, but a PMO can be the rat squad. So keep that in mind. Um, so here we're talking about a project that we're doing in a predictive kind of waterfall traditional way. Okay, and we're talking about um, how things happen. In the last of the chapters, we were talking about kind of organizational planning, ranking projects, deciding a portfolio of projects that we wanted to do. That's all kind of general. So how do projects actually get started from that? We'll have a list of things that we want to pursue. And what we're going to show you here is that there are two kind of points: pre-initiating and initiating. So pre-initiating is kind of done by senior management folks. Okay, senior management work together to determine scope, time, and cost constraints, identify a project sponsor, select a project manager, develop a business case for the project, review processes and expectations, determine if the project should be divided into two or more smaller projects. And then if they're ready to go, well, then they hand it off to a project manager, and that project manager initiates the project. Okay, so then a project manager leads efforts to identify and understand the project stakeholders. So make sure we have the proper stakeholders. Create the project charter and assumption log. We're going to talk about that. And hold a kickoff meeting. Okay, so all these would fall into initiating processes, but it's kind of interesting to to think of if you're going to see yourself as a project manager, what's likely to be handed to you directly, and then what's likely to go on before that. This pre-initiating stuff you might be party to, but you're not running the show. Whereas by the time they hand you the project, you've got some more initiating to do. Okay. So here's a slide that talks about how this pre-initiating was done in the two case projects. And I think I've already said enough about pre-initiating, so I'll leave this for you to read on your own. So here we go. Here's some of the stuff that would come out of this kind of early project initiating stuff from this just-in-time training phase 1 project, which is a waterfall. It's a predictive project. So you can see that we've uh, we've expressed some scope things, these scope goals. And again, I'll leave these for you to read on your own. Okay, and then we have some time goals. Okay, so we've got some time goals, we've got some cost goals, and then we have some assumptions. Now, I think this list of assumptions is a pretty good idea. Here's why. Uh, when projects are being formed up, and when people are talking about the requirements for projects, there's a lot of people talking about what they want and what they need, and not everybody agrees. Okay? It's just like the rest of life. Some people think we need a lot, some people think we need a little. So then we need to begin to document what we're really, um, uh, what assumptions we've decided to rely upon. Okay? Now, that might be contrary to some things that were discussed in the early meetings. We could have gone small or big. Okay. Well, somebody who was guiding us said, I'm sorry, folks, we have to go small. Well, we would be documenting that in this approach assumptions section. Okay. So, one kind of jargon phrase you'll hear a lot is business case. That we need to establish the business case for a project. So, what do we mean by that? So, a business case is a document that provides financial justification for investing in a project. Now, in the last chapter, we talked about how we would do financial analysis for projects, and we talked about uh, net present value. We talked about return on investment. We talked about internal rate of return, and we talked about payback analysis. Okay, well, here would be a place where these could be documented for an individual um, project. So a typical contents for this kind of document: introduction, a background, business objective, current situation, a problem opportunity statement. Again, projects are created to either solve a problem or capitalize on an opportunity or some combination of both. Critical assumptions and constraints, analysis of options and recommendations, preliminary project requirements, budget estimate and financial analysis, schedule estimate, potential risks, exhibits. Now, this is pretty formal, and there's a lot here. okay, would one always do this big of a document for a project? I would say no, but the thing is, the bigger the project gets and the bigger the budget gets, okay, the more people want to see of all these things because they're making a big commitment and they want to know that they're doing it in a thoughtful way. Okay, so now this traditional project gets handed over to a project manager, and as we saw the project manager, she's going to do these initiating processes, and they would include identifying project stakeholders, creating the project charter, creating the assumption log, and holding a kickoff meeting. Okay, and these are all parts that people who follow formal project management would think are all good things to do. So, uh, where would we find more information about these things? Well, if you go back to the PMI stuff and you go to the PM Back Guide 6th edition, uh, it talks about developing a project charter and identifying stakeholders. And it talks about what the outputs of those things would be. So a project charter would include the charter and an assumption log. And identifying the stakeholder might include a stakeholder register, change requests, the project management plan, update, project documents, and updates. Okay, that sounds a little long to me. All right, I'll be honest. So, identifying stakeholders. So, project stakeholders are the people involved in or affected by your project, and we've talked about that before. Internal project stakeholders generally include the project sponsor, the project team, the support staff, and internal customers for the project. Other internal stakeholders include top management, other functional managers, and other project managers. External to your organization, project stakeholders can include the project's customers, if they're external to the organization, competitors, suppliers, other external groups that are potentially involved or affected by the project, such as government officials or concerned citizens. So, a stakeholder, anybody who has some skin in the game, anybody who cares. Um, there's a media snapshot here where the author talks about um, a project where they were doing some sort of entertainment based project associated with the Rolling Stones, and the Rolling Stones themselves were stakeholders. Now, I think that's interesting, but I'll leave all that for you to read on your own. Okay, so I just want to pause here while we're talking about stakeholders and talk about how important it is for a project manager to know that they have the right stakeholders. Okay, because um, when we're forming up a project, we often begin to talk about it. We're talking about the scope of the project, right? And if we think of it as having a very constrained and narrow scope, well, then there'll be fewer stakeholders, right? And then if we expand our thoughts, well, then a project will probably affect more stakeholders, okay? So, um, uh, who the stakeholders are is pretty closely related to what your understanding of the scope is, okay? And because the understanding of the scope could change over time, the project manager should be aware of who potential stakeholders are. Uh, Another thing is this. Um, if you miss a stakeholder, they'll eventually show up. Okay? They'll hear about the project and they'll show up. And you're going to have to deal with their point of view and their needs. And you're going to have the additional problem that they're angry now. Okay? So, an early effort to identify all the potential stakeholders and make sure we haven't left anybody out is well spent time. So, how would we document all this? Well, the PMI folks have taken the best practices that people use in formal project management, and they've documented. So one thing that you can create is a stakeholder register. It's a document that includes the details related to identified project stakeholders. Usually, this is a document available to many people, so it should not include any sensitive information. Kind of a public document. And then a stakeholder analysis is the technique for analyzing information to determine which stakeholders' interests to focus on and how to increase stakeholder support throughout the project. Okay? And this is the kind of thing that you might not want to share with everybody because you're kind of plotting about how to get the best reaction out of everybody, and maybe you wouldn't want to share. Maybe if somebody saw how you kind of analyzed them and how you wanted to approach them, they might feel either you didn't understand them or you intended to manipulate them, right? So a stakeholder analysis document is typically less public than a stakeholder register. So here's the stakeholder register. So we're identifying the people, their position, are they internal, external, what's the project role, what's their contact information. Uh, if projects are long enough, these roles can change, right? A person can quit the organization. They can be promoted. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that you're probably going to want to maintain over time to make sure that the list of people that you're thinking of is the right list. Um, here's some stuff that's discussed in the text that I think is helpful, and this is the classic management consulting for a quadrant chart, right? And so we're saying that the approach that you take to stakeholders should be informed by the amount of power they have and the amount of interest they have in the project. So, for instance, if they have high power and high interest, you want to manage them closely. Okay, if they have low power and low interest, you just want to monitor them. They're still a stakeholder. You don't want them to be off the radar. If they have high power and low interest, you want to make sure you keep them satisfied. Okay, and if they have low power and high interest, you want to make sure you keep them informed. Okay. I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so one of the things that I really like about this project management body of knowledge from PMI is that they've really tapped into a lot of research about people and management and human relations and all that kind of stuff. And they have a number of frameworks like this to help you as a PM be thoughtful about what you're doing. And this is a great case in point. So, how could you categorize the engagement levels of various stakeholders? So, this has to do with how interested they are, and then how much you pulled them into the project. So, they might be unaware of the project. They might be resistant to the project. They may be neutral. Okay, they may be supportive, or they may be leading in that they're aware of the project and its potential impacts, and they're actively engaged in helping it succeed. Now, provided that stakeholders have the frame of mind to move up the scale from unaware all the way to leading, well, you'd probably like to uh, continue to nurture them so that they move up the scale, right? Okay. It's not possible for everybody. And maybe it's not worth the investment for people who have, say, low power. Okay. But still, in general, you want to move people up the scale. And again, this is another one of these analytical frameworks to kind of help you get your job done. Um, this is a cartoon that I don't understand. So I'm going to leave you to appreciate it on your own. So, what's a project charter? Okay, well, a project charter is a part of this um, predictive waterfall approach to organizing and initiating a project. Okay, uh, it's a document that formally recognizes the existence of a project and provides a summary of the project's objectives and management. It authorizes the project manager to use organizational resources to complete the project. So it kind of answers the question, if you're a project manager and somebody comes into your office and saying, what are you doing taking all these people and pursuing this? Uh, you would say, I'm managing the XYZ project. And then they would say, well, who told you that you could manage the XYZ project? And you would say, well, here's my project charter. Okay. So that's what they mean when they say that. Ideally, the project manager will play a major role in developing the project charter. Instead of project charters, some organizations initiate projects using a simple letter of agreement or formal contracts. So here's and one more point: a crucial part of a charter is the sign-off section. So a project charter or some kind of contract or some kind of a letter of agreement. It's a formal statement of uh, it's an enabling document for the project. It says uh, whoever signed off on it, and they should be people with authority, uh, they've agreed that we're doing this project and it's about so big, and here are the expectations of it. So, what could be in a project charter? Well, the project's title and date of authorization, project manager's name, a summary schedule or timeline, a summary of the estimated cost and budget, a brief description of project's objectives, project success criteria or approval requirements, um, a summary of the planned approach, uh, a roles and responsibilities matrix. Okay, who's going to play what kind of role on the project? A sign off section for signatures of key project stakeholders, and a comments section in which the stakeholders can provide important comments related to the project. So, project charters have been very popular for 30, 40 years. And what people liked about them is that all these kind of pre-initiating and initiating activities were documented. okay, such that um, whenever we want to take a course of action, we want to know that the relevant players, the people who have authority, uh, they've come to a meeting of the minds about the course of action that we're going to pursue. Okay? And the charter is just a document embodiment of that understanding. Okay? And again, for the last 30, 40 years, people have thought that project charters were a good way to document that. Could it be some other document that does the same thing, not called a project charter? Sure, it could. Okay. So here's an example project charter for the just-in-time training project. It has the title, the start date, the budget, the project manager, project objectives, success criteria. Okay. Um, and here are some more details. Okay. Now, I think we mentioned before that we might want to have an assumptions log. Okay. So what's that? An assumptions log is a document used to record and track assumptions and constraints throughout the life of a project. Okay, so it probably would come to life when we're working on the early documents like a charter. Okay, I haven't always heard it called assumptions log. This is the kind of the PMI name for it. I've also heard it called an issues log, and I'll get back to why. It aids in communicating information to stakeholders and avoids potential confusions. Most projects include several assumptions that affect the scope, time, cost, risk, and other knowledge areas. It's important to document and validate these assumptions. And if you're working on a project of any size, okay, what you find is that people join the project, people leave the project. And the fact is that some questions reemerge over and over again. Why aren't we doing such and such? Why did we decide to do this? Can't we do this? Okay. And these logs are an opportunity to document these things and what we decided and who decided it. Okay. So I would say it's not impossible that we would ever open one of these assumptions or issues again. Okay. But having a log where you can go back and say, you know, we discussed this on September 1st and we decided what to do. Okay. A lot of times that's just the end of it. A person will say, oh, I didn't know that. Okay, fine. That's what we're going to do. Okay. Somebody will try to reopen old issues. Okay, that's fine. Okay, and maybe they're best reopen and redecide it. Okay, but having a list of them, especially in larger projects with a large group of people, can really be an efficient way to not be like rehashing old issues ad nauseum. Okay, so I think this is a pretty good practice. And again, quite a few people call these issues logs instead of assumption log. Um, Another very popular thing to do at the beginning of a project, um, in the early phases when it's been handed over to a project manager, is have a kickoff meeting. And it does a couple of things. One, it gets everybody on the same page about what's going on. It sets expectations. But it's also a ceremonial start. Okay. And it's also another opportunity for some of these senior managers and sponsors or champions to show up and fly the flag and tell people in the organization just how important this thing is and just how much power and influence are behind the project. Okay, so Most people say that a project kickoff meeting is something, do you have to do it on every project? Most experienced project managers would say, no, you don't, but it's a low cost way to get a good start, and they do it every time. Okay. And we say down here you could do it face to face or you could do it online. It's kind of interesting. In previous versions of this book, there was a lot of talk about what you could do, what you had to do face to face, and what you could do online. And certainly since the pandemic of 2020 and continuing on, most of us realize you can do anything online. You know, it it might be better to be face to face, but we've all learned to be pretty effective on Zoom. So just about anything you can do face to face, you can do on Zoom, except for maybe shaking hands. Here's a sample kickoff meeting agenda. Let's see, introduce attendees, review the background, review project related documents, discuss the project organizational structure, project scope, time, and costs, discuss other important topics, list action items from the meeting. Okay, that sounds like a good agenda for a kickoff. Okay, so that whole group of things we just went through are more typically what we've been talking about for um, predictive waterfall kinds of projects. Okay. Now, what might be different if we were taking an agile approach? Okay. So the second case in the chapter, this global construction human capital, is an agile influence project. Okay, so we're going to talk about what they did in this case. Um, they decided that they were going to take an agile slash hybrid approach for managing the project because the scope was unclear. Okay, there's an argument for that. They wanted incremental deliveries of valuable products. They expected many changes along the way, and they wanted to use whatever practice would work best to achieve the best outcome. They didn't want to be tied to one particular approach, but they would like to use a lot of practices from Scrum, some from Kanban, another kind of agile flavor. And they also wanted to do some predictive stuff as well. So they wanted to be able to take a hybrid approach. Um, so unlike the the first of the cases, just-in-time training, there was no need for a business case because the company knew it was a good investment and decided to initially fund three Scrum teams of 3 to 5 people each. More funding would be provided as needed. Okay, and what is this? In the last the chapters, we said that sometimes we decide that we want to do a project because it meets broad organizational needs. Okay, so maybe this is the kind of project where it's hard to do a financially oriented business case for this thing, but we know that this is something that we need to do for the organization. Okay, so uh, uh, skipping this kind of detailed financial analysis might um, that that's the kind of thing where you're saying the organization is committed this because of organizational values. Maybe it's an infrastructure kind of project, and this is an infrastructure kind of project. It's like human capital infrastructure. They would follow the Scrum framework to some extent, but use other ways of working as needed. Most of the team members would be working virtually. It's just what everybody's doing. Um, so the Scrum framework here we have the Scrum framework um, pretty well documented. So um, what's kind of interesting is we're not showing all of the Scrum stuff. So the Scrum approach usually has up front a product vision statement and a a roadmap. Okay, so we don't see that happening. Okay, but and as part of that work, we identify a bunch of user stories, and those user stories and a bunch of infrastructure tasks, they make up these things that we would call the product backlog. Okay. And what we're seeing of Scrum here is like after that upfront lightweight planning, what goes on here? Well, we do sprint planning, okay? So that's we pick what goes into the sprint, okay? And then we run the sprint for some length of time. Usually people say from 1 to 4 weeks. I particularly like 2. Okay. Another thing that we do is during the sprint, people talk about having a daily scrum, which is a stand-up meeting where we coordinate with each other. And then at the very end, we do a sprint review, okay, which is where we review the products with the stakeholders. And then we do a retrospective, which is kind of learning from our experience. Okay, do we want to kind of change our ways of operation based upon our experience? And then we turn right around again and we get into planning for the next sprint. Okay, so this is a pretty typical diagram for Scrum. Scrum is the most popular um, kind of branded framework for Agile, and it's one that I think is pretty well kind of understood in the field. Scrum pillar values. So according to the Scrum guide, the pillar values are transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Okay. And it also emphasizes 5 values: commitment, focus, openness, respect, and courage. Now, in our class, we're also reading, in addition to the Schwalbe book, we're reading from the Leighton book. And I think they have a good discussion of all of these. Um, Personally, I have to confess that I find some of these things to be um, a little bit of hot air. The courage is a little bit of hot air. I I I think what they're like one to courage. I think that they think that there in a lot of organizations that there's going to be resistance to the agile approach, and so these beliefs, right, and values, I think that they're meant to be almost an inoculation for the people on the team so that the people on the team can deal effectively with the pushback that they would hear about their approach in a non agile organization. Okay. Uh, but apart from that, I think there's a little bit of hot air here. Video highlights. So we've got some links here to videos that you can play where you can hear people talk about Agile and Scrum. And again, I think in our class, the Layton book is, I think, a good version of what Scrum Agile people say and what they believe. Okay, but by all means, if you want to play some videos, have at it. Okay, so this second case is GCHC. What aspects of it are more maybe hybrid um, than just complete Agile and Scrum? And according to the case, they still created a project charter, a kickoff meeting, a stakeholder register, and a stakeholder analysis. Okay. And for me, I think that the project charter and the Scrum vision statement are very much play the same role. Okay, so um, I don't know. I probably would have done the vision statement. Okay. They did have a project manager, Deborah, who was also served as the product owner and the scrum master. Now, um, really hardcore agile people will say, I just had one say to me on Twitter within the last, well, this is the Labor Day holiday weekend. So it, it was over the Labor Day holiday weekend. We were going back and forth. And his claim was that true agile teams didn't have managers, that they were self-directed teams, and implicit in that is that they didn't have a manager. And my claim is that was bullshit. Okay, that that the Scrum Master, to the extent that they're a servant leader, is a project manager, right? And but you actually have people claim that agile teams don't have managers. Okay, and that's a pretty extreme drinking the Kool-Aid kind of interpretation of agile. Okay, and so one of the nice things that Kathy Schwalbe has done here is saying, okay, well, we did have a project manager, and some people are going to claim that that's not agile. So I'm going to say that's what makes our approach here hybrid. Okay, I can accept that. So we're talking about what would an agile slash hybrid process uh, uh, initiating process look like? Well, again, some things would be done by senior management, okay, and then they would hand it off to a project team, okay. So it's kind of the same deal here. Now, in our course, we're reading the Layton book. There's not a lot of talk here about what senior management does. In Scrum, we have this product owner, okay? And the product owner is kind of seen as a person who has a lot of clout in the organization. So maybe the product owner kind of plays this role, okay? But there's a lot of things that have to be done that are not really talked about quite so much in agile. But the things like creating the product vision statement, or creating the product strategy that they talk about here, or um, creating the product roadmap. Uh, this is this kind of pre-initiating stuff, okay? Which again, the agile people would call lightweight project planning, okay? Um, Identifying key stakeholders. So the product owner is responsible for maximizing the value of the product created by the development team and by managing the product backlog. I think the product owner idea is a really good idea. Even in predictive waterfall projects that I was involved with as far back as 1980, so that's getting to be close to 45 years. Having a key person on the client side or the user side or the uh, uh, to be, a sponsor, a person to be an owner for the system. That was always a good thing to do. And so the product owner, I think, is a really great idea. The Scrum Master is responsible for promoting and supporting the Scrum process as defined in the Scrum Guide. And I really do like the idea that they say that a Scrum Master is supposed to be a servant leader. Okay. Uh, the Agile approach, particularly the Scrum brand of it, does have this idea that teams are supposed to be self-organizing and they're supposed to take a lot of responsibility for things. And there's a lot of emphasis that the Scrum Master is not so much of a hierarchical boss, but more of a person who gets obstacles out of the way. Now, good waterfall project managers have often had that quality too. They just weren't called Scrum Masters. And then, of course, you have the development team. Um, these are the people who are actually going to work on and create the product or the service. As part of lightweight agile project planning, we usually have this product vision statement. I'm a big fan of the agile project vision statement because um, compared to the project charter, in my mind, the product vision statement is more kind of product and client focused. So, a product vision describes the desired future state that would be achieved by developing and deploying a product or service. And it takes this kind of format here for uh, for a, and then the target customer who, statement of the need of opportunity, the product name is and you mentioned the category, that key benefit, reason to buy, unlike the competitors or alternatives, our product, and then you say what your differentiation is. And in the Leighton book, he also says that the last thing that he'd like us to do is to link this vision to the organization's stated strategy. I think that's a good idea too. So, an example here for current and future employees who decide to work and advance in our company, the Global Construction Human Capital Project is an incentive and learning program. That's the classification that helps people develop new skills that lead to employment and advancement with our company. Unlike other programs, our product assesses people's interests and abilities, provides multiple options for incentives and learning, and leads to specific opportunities with our company. Now, what's really nice is it explains who this is for, how it's going to create value for them, and how it's different from alternatives. Okay. Now you can follow all the directions on a project, a charter, and not answer all those questions. Okay. So if you fill out a project charter form, you do see lots of questions about what's the budget, what's the schedule, and all that. And certainly some understanding of those things is important to have. But these are key things that I think are very appealing. And this is one of the reasons why Agile is so prominent today, is that this almost like product and service management component of the vision is a very powerful way to explain a project and to justify it. And not surprisingly, they think that we ought to link this to strategy. So, a product strategy is a high level plan describing what the organization hopes to accomplish with its product and how it plans to do so. So, this is exactly the point that Leighton makes in his book, that you ought to tack on one more thing to say in the vision about how this product or service links to the organization's strategy. Um, if you're going to take an agile approach, well, then you're probably going to organize a roadmap. Okay. And here we're talking about these are the features that we're going to deliver, and here's how we expect them to come out over time. Creating an initial product backlog and estimating size. Now, we're going to work on this more in subsequent chapters. Okay, but the product owner, in collaboration with the team and other key stakeholders, creates an initial product backlog, which is an emergent, ordered list of what is needed to improve the product or create the product, right? The contents of the product backlog usually include a priority number, ID, a description, and an estimate. Okay. Now, what what's okay? So those are all the fields that we fill in. Those are the columns. What are the rows? Well, the major thing that we put into the rows are user stories. User stories are the way that we document requirements in Agile. Okay. Now, some people, really hardcore Agile people, were saying, well, we're not really documenting the requirements because a user story is just a reminder to go get the true requirements during the sprint. Okay, that's true. But they're an expression of a requirement, and usually they have the form of as a type of user, I want some goal so that some reason. Okay. So are those the only things that get onto the backlog? Well, if we only put user stories onto the backlog, then we'd have a whole bunch of activities that the project has to do that we'd never do. Things like select, well, again, let's say it's a software project. Okay. What user story is going to cover the selection and the installation and the testing of a relational database? Well, no, it's more of an infrastructure part. So, in addition to user stories, most teams have things on the backlog that take up the rows of this backlog that are tasks that are needed to be done to create infrastructures that support and enable the user stories. Okay, and what do people do? I mean, how do you know what kind of estimating is done in Agile projects? Well, again, we're going to do more of this in our class. We're going to actually try our hand at the Agile estimating approach. But what we usually do is we take each of the stories and we take each of the other tasks and we try to give them a point score. Okay, and it's this that allows the project team this in a kind of upfront lightweight planning where we create a vision, okay, and a roadmap, and we create a backlog with user stories and maybe these infrastructure tasks, and we come up with some kind of rough estimates. It's only this that allows us to tell responsible people that we have some confidence that our agile project can produce um, enough outputs to make people happy in the length of time that we think we're going to be doing this agile project. So, is it a big plan up front? No, it's not. Is it no planning up front? Well, you can see from the discussion here, it is not no planning up front. It's lightweight planning up front. So here's a backlog, okay, in which we have user stories and we've given them relative sizes. In this case, we've used an approach that they call t-shirt size, small, medium, extra large. Okay, and we'll get into this more in our course. Product release plan. Okay, so as part of the um, product roadmap, okay, where you're talking about the features that are going to be in the product or service, and um, you're talking about how these are going to merge from the project over time. One issue you have to be able to address is are we going to just release one final product or service, or are we going to have key points in our project where we are going to release subsets of the project of the product or service? Okay, and often the agile folks like to sell the agile approach by saying that we get the benefit of being able to release the product or service early in increments. Okay, so if we intend to do that, then as part of our lightweight planning up front, in addition to having uh, the other planning things that we talked about, we need a release plan that says when you look at the roadmap, at these key points in the roadmaps, we're going to have a product or service release. And here we're showing that we're doing that by taking certain features that are coming from the sprints, and we're including them in releases. It's generally thought, okay, that we don't want to release our product or service at the end of every sprint. That's it creates maybe too much of a burden on the team. Okay, so that you know, if we're going to have say 10 sprints, we don't want 10 releases. We might want 2 or 3 or 4, but well short of 10. Best practices. This is propaganda having to do with training your workforce and relating to the 2 projects that are the cases in the chapter. And I'm going to leave you to read that propaganda on your own. And that brings us to the chapter summary. Okay? So, and I'm going to leave you to read that on your own too. So, I think that the takeaway from this chapter is that regardless of what approach you're going to be taking in your project, there's some planning to be done. Okay? If we're going to take a predictive, traditional kind of approach to the project, Well, then there's big planning up front. So we're going to be doing things like a charter, and we're going to be doing something like an assumption log, and all those things, right? But even if you're taking a totally agile approach, it's not no planning up front, right? So these things that we talked about, like uh, the vision statement and all those other kinds of things, those are documents. Those are plans. They may be lightweight. There might be the kind of understanding that they're more easily changed than documents in a more traditional approach over time. I don't know that that's true, but I've certainly heard some people claim that. So, um, the agile folks, if you're doing even full bore agile, they're not saying no planning, they're saying just enough planning. Okay? So I'm going to leave you with that thought. I'm going to say bye until next time. Bye bye.